All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. We should probably get started today with our event. I'm Eric Langenbacher. I am a senior fellow and the director of the Society Culture and Politics program at the American Institute for Contemporary German Studies. I'm really pleased to welcome all of you, our attendees today, as well as our panelists, to talk about climate policy since reunification. I should note that this is the fourth webinar in our series commemorating the 30th anniversary of German reunification. We're trying to use this as an opportunity to reflect on a variety of issues and topic areas of particular import to Germany today. And I'm so thrilled to briefly introduce our two speakers. We have Sonja Thielges and Charlotte Unger, who are both from the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies in Potsdam. Their bios you can see in our announcement as well as on our website. But as you can see, they are both very distinguished, both from a scholarly and from a practical perspective. So without further ado, I would like to hand the floor over to them. Let me note that we will have lots of time for a question and answer period after the formal presentation. So please put your question in the chat, or if there's a question, the Q&A format at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and then I will curate the questions for our panelists when we get to that point. Sonja, I believe you're up first.
I'm up first. Thanks so much, Eric. I'm sorry, am I sharing the screen already? No, okay. Let me do that now then. 1 second. Okay, here we go. Hello, everyone. And thanks so much to IASS and to Eric and also to Liz for having us in this series. Charlotte and I are very excited to be part of this. We will be talking to you, as you know, today about climate policy since reunification, sort of looking at both the national dimension and the international dimension of German climate policy. And let me just very briefly tell you a little bit about the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies for those who are not familiar with the Institute, which maybe most of you, in fact. So we are a research institute located in Potsdam in Germany and funded by the German federal government. We have basically our research focus, as the name already indicates, I guess, is on sustainability studies. We have many different groups focusing on different issues, and Charlotte in her project, for instance, focuses broadly on international climate issues, and in my project we focus on sustainable energy but also climate issues, and then there's a bunch more research going on, so if you're interested, of course, always check out our research on our website. And with that, I just want to walk you very briefly through our agenda for today. So we will share this presentation and have divided it up a little bit. I'll get you started with an introduction that we wanted to give you on this general topic of climate policy and how it actually emerged in Germany. So what were the beginnings of this policy field, basically. And then we've decided to talk about German climate policy and divided up into 3 different phases. And as we discussed this, we actually discovered these 3 different phases that we want to talk about do roughly correspond also with the 3 decades that we are looking at. So we'll be talking about climate policy in the 90s. I'll hand over to Charlotte for a look at what was happening in terms of climate policy in the new millennium in Germany. And then we'll have a look at more recent climate policy, at what climate policy looks like today, and end our little talk with some conclusions on climate policy matters. So what I wanted to start off with, to start this introduction to the talk, was really to get everyone on the same page regarding the issue. I mean, you don't always have to repeat it, but I find it interesting to keep this in mind. Of course, what are we dealing with? Global warming, we know from research, is a phenomenon that will shift or is already shifting weather patterns And it has many different consequences, as we see on the picture. For instance, the wildfires that people from the US, I guess, are very familiar with, from the Californian case, for instance. So there's an increased risk of fires, of droughts, but also of flooding. And we know very well, actually, also from research, what the response to this issue needs to be. And this response, roughly speaking, is that we need to arrive at net zero emissions in our economies roughly by the year 2050. So if we think about it, that is actually 30 years from today, of course, making it, maybe I find, actually all the more interesting to look back at the past 30 years and see what has been accomplished already. And so we know, if we speak to people abroad, Germany is often perceived by many as sort of a climate policy frontrunner. And we thought in this talk it would be interesting to take a little bit of a critical look at this, sort of understanding better why Germany is perceived that way, and also maybe discussing a little bit whether this is actually true or not. So that's basically the plan we have for today. Of course, there's a lot of things one could potentially talk about. We've just picked a couple of issues to give you a glimpse and to give you a better understanding of what's been happening here. And so just as sort of a second part of this introduction, I wanted to mention some of the very early milestones in climate policy development in Germany. And so basically both parts of Germany very early on faced pretty severe environmental challenges. There were huge environmental issues in many regards, and both parts basically responded by creating institutions to deal with these types of problems. Just to name some, the German Democratic Republic, the GDR, created in 1972 already its own environment ministry. The West Germany followed a bit later, actually, with this. And then in 1987, the German Bundestag, the parliament, introduced a commission that was working on so-called precautions to protect Earth's atmosphere. So this was really already in 1987 a result of this commission that global warming is happening, it needs to be addressed. The 2-degree goal was mentioned already at this time, actually, that needed to be met, meaning warming shouldn't rise above 2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. And some measures were already basically introduced that could help Germany meet this challenge. And with that, I would like to move into this first phase after reunification, climate policy in the 1990s. And if we think a little bit about how to sort of characterize this phase, I would say it was a phase where this issue rose to the political agenda. It became increasingly important. Nevertheless, the responses to the issue were soft, if you will. They were voluntary agreements the German government made with different industries, and basically driven by the hope that to a certain extent the problem would solve itself. And so the reunification process started another process in the East German Bundesländer, a process of deindustrialization. And in this process, a lot of greenhouse gas intensive industries were actually closed down, also reducing vastly energy demand in East Germany. And this also meant especially reducing demand for coal, which is very emission intensive. And these industries depended very highly on coal in different contexts. So both halves of Germany, if you will, had actually started out at reunification with different levels of carbon emissions. West Germany started out with about half as much per capita emissions than East Germany. So the problem was actually much more severe in East Germany. And what happened throughout this decade was that increasingly West German environmental standards were applied to East Germany, also. And in 1990, the first sort of joint program was introduced to reduce CO2 emissions. And this program, for instance, also featured a feed-in tariff for renewable energy. So this notion that any climate efforts should also entail a transition towards more clean energy sources. I think another noteworthy development sort of is in 1998 when the Green Party for the first time in history joined the federal governing coalition in Germany. And it did give important impulses for climate issues as well. And among the results, for instance, is in 2000, the introduction of an environmental tax that affected gasoline, for instance, and the German Energy Resources Act, the so-called EEG. And so these, basically what I discussed briefly here are all domestic developments. But what we see already in the 90s is that German policy is increasingly also driven by international efforts, and is also in a way, the German government is in itself also strongly engaged in these international efforts. In 1992, of course, very noteworthy, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was established, and 3 years later, in 95, the environmental minister at the time, you can see her in this little picture, I hope it's not too blurry, with a very different appearance from today. I guess you can hardly recognize her, Angela Merkel, of course. Who convened the first conference of the party of the UNFCCC in Berlin at the time. And Merkel's approach at the time was really to lead the world by example, to implement Germany's own climate protection measures and create followers for this approach. The conference overall wasn't too successful, I guess, but one of the outcomes was the so-called Berlin Mandate, which was an agreement among the participants to develop an international treaty for climate protection measures that should be done by 1997. And in 1997, of course, you might recognize it. Indeed, the so-called Kyoto Protocol under the UNFCCC was established. So what we basically see is that Germany at this point enters into the new millennium with considerable ambitions for climate protection. And at the same time, or sort of underpinning this, also an emerging interest in the transformation of its energy system towards more sustainability. So with that, I would actually hand it over to my dear colleague Charlotte, who will guide you into the new millennium, so to speak. Charlotte, I'll give you the floor, and please let me know. I'll shift to the next slide and then let me know when I should go on.
Okay, thanks. I hope you can all hear me. So, as we've just heard, I guess Germany started off with some pretty ambition and some good targets in the new millennium. However, when I look into the whole first decade of 2000, I guess I would be a little bit more careful with this, and I would probably call it more of a hesitant climate policy that made little progress and rather missed chances. So as Sonja said, we started off with a government that was a coalition with the Greens, but then the new government under then already Chancellor Angela Merkel, well, it can probably be called more as a government that sought to satisfy industrial interests, so satisfy the interests of the coal industry and of the automobile industry, and therefore really missed some good chances, for example, in the building retrofit sector and so on. And also, I guess I would call that first decade of 2000 also a decade which was characterized also by a struggle between a climate policy struggle, also between the German provinces, the Länder, and the federal level, where there was little agreement really always. And so yes, this is probably a little bit more of a pessimistic view on that decade. Maybe a positive thing to highlight is that Germany in that time launched a very big funding initiative, the so-called climate initiative of 2008, so a national climate initiative and an international climate initiative, which up until today really fund a large amount of climate policy projects in Germany, but also internationally. Yes, I think at this point it's important to see that climate policy is really an EU issue. So climate policy for a few years now is really made by the EU. That means that the EU proposes climate policy regulations or so-called directives, which then member states, Germany, put into national law or really contribute to and make domestic climate policy out of. Yeah, EU climate policy also took off rather in or started to develop more or less in the 90s. But again, I would say the international developments like these negotiations around the Kyoto Protocol really gave this important push also for the EU to come out with climate policy. So for example, under the Kyoto Protocol, the EU then committed to an 8%, overall 8% greenhouse gas reductions by 2012. This is, for example, translated in a burden sharing agreement where this overall goal is really divided between member states according to greenhouse gas emissions, but also to wealth. So for example, Germany had to reduce 21% in that under that burden sharing. But yes, I think what is remarkable also under this pressure of the Kyoto Protocol that the EU had really for a long time, for a decade or so, had been struggling with coming up with climate policy instrument. They had been thinking about introducing a tax for a decade, a carbon tax. And then with the push under this Kyoto Protocol, they finally came up with a cap and trade and EU emissions trading system, which is interesting because under the Kyoto negotiations, it was, maybe some of you remember, it was really the US who pushed more for emissions trading. And then in the end, it was the EU that came up with this cap and trade system actually quite quickly. I think they proposed it in 2002, and then they really adopted this system in 2005, and it became really the flagship policy of the EU, the one climate policy instrument. But yeah, this said, let me move to the next slide, please. So saying this, I think it's important to step back shortly and see also that EU and German climate policy don't occur separately from the rest of the world. They have to be seen against the background of the international setting. So maybe if you remember, some of you remember that the Kyoto Protocol had an expiring date in 2012. So countries fairly quickly had to negotiate again to come up with a follow-up deal. And maybe also some of you heard that this negotiation for a new climate deal, new international climate deal was really, really difficult. And by 2009, in 2010, the start of the second decade in the 20th century, 21st, sorry. It was clear that really internationally there was somewhat of a gridlock, and negotiation really failed to come up with a new deal. So let's call the second decade of 2000 really started with an international failure. Meanwhile, Germany had come up with a new climate program, a new energy and climate package that promised a reduction of even 40% of greenhouse gases by 2020. I guess I would say this largely, climate policy in Germany then largely depended on its increase in renewable energies. But then there was a second international development that was really important, or important push then, which is of course actually a very sad incident, this nuclear accident 2011 in Fukushima, somewhat increased awareness in Germany, and that thereby pushed also policymakers to commit stronger towards the energy transition. So yes, this was actually a push factor. However, a few years later, again, it became clear that 2000 that Germany was failing its targets. So in 2014, we knew already that probably, very likely, we would not achieve our 2020 targets. And I guess also at the EU level, while it wasn't really working very well, the EU emissions trading system was then really working only very inefficiently, and so there was also at that level it was going well. So I guess in that sense it was really a good and a great momentum when then the Paris Agreement was decided in 2015, and also the IPCC report that on the 1.5 degrees. I think these two, let's call it developments, really revived somehow EU and German climate policies. So for example, at that moment, then after the Paris Agreement and towards the end of the second decade of the 2000s, the EU emissions trading system really faced a good reform. The EU came up with a national determined contribution under the Paris Agreement with new goals. So at least that was a sign. So next slide, please. So again, let me come to or give you a glimpse maybe of what happened then, or what happened more recently. I think maybe it can be seen as a backlash again, because after the 2015 Paris Agreement was adopted, then shortly later ratified also, fairly quickly it became clear that what countries had promised under this international deal was not enough to even achieve its own goal of keeping global warming under 2 degrees. So what countries had promised, I think UNEP calculated that it would only achieve like a third of what would be necessary to achieve the 1.5 degrees targets. And also in Germany, emissions, we will see that later on the slide, on our last slide. Also in Germany, emissions had stagnated really between 2000 and 2017. So I guess maybe it's not really a surprise that in this time we saw a big wave of youth protests, but not only youth protests, but a big wave of this opposition against really what happened in climate policy in Germany. And I think in Germany there was a big movement, but all around the world. So let me maybe finish this last part with a little bit of a hopeful or a hopeful perspective, and thinking that maybe this movement and these protests that we have seen in the last few years and months, that this has really maybe created a new momentum for German climate policy, and maybe given it a new push also globally. So this careful assumption of a new momentum for climate policy, we would like to give you a few examples too that could underpin this assumption. So next slide. Thanks. So our first assumption is that for a new push is that, for example, climate policy for the first time in Germany was put into a German climate law. So since December of last year, 2019, we have a climate law in force that promises, that commits to minus 55 greenhouse gas reductions by 2030. and also climate neutrality. So important, what Sonja mentioned in her first slide. So we have climate neutrality promised by 2055. And maybe another interesting aspect is that also in this law, for the first time, really it sets a goal for each sector. So all energy, agriculture, waste, they have annual goals, and the ministry, so the Ministry for Agriculture, is really responsible for achieving this goal, and not only the Ministry for the Environment. And maybe another important aspect that is also very new here in Germany, that we will have, in addition to the emissions trading system in the EU, we will have a German carbon price on fossil fuels. So for example, in 2021, this will be 25 euros per ton. As consumers, we will most likely feel that in an increase of the fuel. So it's probably 7 euro per liter of fuel. Maybe another important aspect is that the government is trying to to make some social dividend of the income that is generated by this carbon price. So they will try to redistribute this to the society, for example, through to reducing the fees for trains, or yes. So yes, in general, I would say that this climate law is a good first step. Of course, I wouldn't call it really super ambitious, but at least it's a good sign. So yes, I would like to hand over with this slide to Sonja for a second example of this climate momentum.
Thank you, Charlotte. Yeah, we did want to end this with a positive note, but looking at the time, I'm realizing that I don't have too much time to actually do that. But what I did want to mention was another sort of positive example, which is the energy transition, the so-called Energiewende, and with its particular approach also that is fairly recent to coal phase out. What you see in the graph, I hope you can maybe see the numbers a little bit, is the share of different energy sources in power production. And we see that Germany is doing quite well, actually, in terms of renewables. Renewables make up, last year, it was in 2019 numbers, they made up already a share of a good 40%. Germany has additional ambitious targets in this regard, also for reducing energy demand. We have the nuclear phase out that will actually happen within the next 2 years. And then the coal phase out, which is set to be finished by 2038. And I mentioned this, it doesn't seem very ambitious to get this done over a period of 18 years from now, I guess. But what I find quite remarkable about this, the government set a commission in place to actually figure out how to go about phasing out coal, involving all kinds of stakeholders that will be affected by this coal phase out. They came up not only with this maybe not so ambitious date, but also with a clear roadmap on how to go about this. And the new thing about this actually is that there is a plan, not just on the one hand to increase the share of renewables, energy efficiency, and so on, but really a plan thinking about how can we actually get out of fossil fuel production? How can we do this? How can we reduce this? So this was just the one thing I wanted to mention. And then the other thing, and I'll just touch on this very briefly now, Germany is of course involved at multiple levels in climate policy. Charlotte already mentioned earlier, so I won't go into this much more. There is a lot of international engagement of Germany. It gives money and it participates in a lot of initiatives that drive climate policy globally. And very important, as in the US, is also always to note subnational initiatives of all kinds that are also connected in global networks. So this is definitely also a hopeful note, and there's definitely momentum in there and has been for a couple of years now. And with that, again, sort of looking at the time, I promised we wouldn't talk this long, and now we have anyway. Sorry about that. But just as a conclusion, Charlotte and I actually decided to just show this one slide because we've been talking about the policies all the time, and we wanted to just briefly look at what has actually been achieved. So what you see here is greenhouse gas emissions in the period between 1990 on the left hand and then all the way up to 2050 on the right hand side. And what we see is, again, you see this period of reunification where there was actually quite a steep decline in emissions that happened at first, but afterwards Germany never actually achieved such a decline anymore, and sort of there's a little bit of back and forth, up and down, that is very much tied to issues like closing coal plants because they're old, or economic activity goes down, things like that. But serious reductions have only recently started again in this period over the past couple of years. And we see here we might or might not reach our 2020 target. If we do, it's due to the COVID crisis and not due to our ambitions. But then if we think about this again, this is a period of 30 years to look back, and looking ahead, we see 2050, and basically this shows us the giant challenge that still lies ahead in Germany to get to this decarbonized system. And so yes, Germany definitely is doing things already, but there's a lot of work ahead, I would say. So I would hand over, Charlotte, one more time, briefly, I think, to you for some final remarks. And yeah, that's the end of my part.
Yeah, thanks, Sonja. Yeah, also, I don't want to go into details now again, to just leave some time for our discussion. Maybe just very quickly get back to our initial question. Yes, is Germany a front runner or not? Of course, it's hard to say. I hope it became clear that in our talk that it's maybe not the front runner as it wishes, or as we wish ourselves that we would be. So I guess in the past decades, it has been really a struggle, and some very good chances were missed. So it has not always been a front runner, I would say, or a climate policy leader. I hope somewhat that this will change. And I think there's, as Sonja also mentioned, I mean, there's some good moments. So at least we have decided on a coal phase out, which I would say, like, if I just think about, let's say 8 years back or somewhat, I think a coal phase out, for example, would never have been possible. And now we really have it, even though it's not as fast as we want it to be. It is there. So that is a good sign. And I think there's also, as Sonja mentioned, there's really much happening that is maybe not as easy visible as it is like with national policy. So there's really also much activity going on the very local level. So there's many communities that are active in climate policy, that are actively pushing. And I think these are great signs. So let's hope that we will get there. So thanks, yes.
All right, well, thank you very much for an incredibly informative and engaging presentation from both of you. We'll now transition to our Q&A portion. So if anybody has any questions, please type them in the Q&A box. Oh, and we already have some questions. So I'll start with one from Sabina von Mering. Can you comment on Fridays for Future / Wuppertal Institute's publication that came out today about how to stay below 1.5 degrees of warming? Do you agree that no German party actually has a plan to reach that?
Charlotte, do you want to go? Or should I? I can't hear you. You're muted, I think. Okay, I'll just take a first stab at that then.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, to be honest, I haven't seen it yet. So you know more than I do probably, Sabine. But I mean, in a way, agreed. I mean, as we pointed out a little bit, I think this will actually be one of the maybe there's these two large issues. I mean, I think even people in Germany, and this includes the parties, have no clear concept of the type of transformation that will be required in Germany, which is quite, I mean, it's huge basically, and how to also actually maintain public trust and public support in implementing these measures that will become necessary. For some cases and some policy areas, solutions from a technological point of view aren't necessarily there yet, and Germany is starting to jump on some solutions, like more recently, maybe hydrogen could be a solution for industrial processes. Just for instance, this technology has been around, of course, but the German government often sort of decides as it goes, and so I think there's really no plan with regard to what is necessary. And again, I think what has been lacking so far, I mean, this is just the one thing, is we need to have cleaner energy. For instance, energy is of course key in this process, but how do we actually get out of fossil fuels? What is the plan for that? And not just goals for something, but really how do we do it? I think that's been a huge challenge for the parties from my perspective.
Yeah, I agree. I just very quickly, I would say it's true that I think that at the moment there's really no political party that has a plan how we really get there. And I think in Germany we have two big problems, which is on the one hand the transport sector and then the building sector. And we're really struggling. You might know Germans love their cars. So that's really an issue in German, the transport sector. How do we get there? How do we get to a really cleaner transport? As we said, that the German, as I just very briefly mentioned, that this new German the law, but also this carbon price seeks to tackle this problem somewhat by putting a price on fuels. However, also there is already some calculations that it might not be enough to really change people's behavior to really use their cars less, or so 7 cents. Yes, this is actually already the price. We know that the fuel, at least here in Germany, sometimes varies between the weekend and the week. So will this really cause a change? So yes, as we said, there is some signs for some more spirit in climate policy, but not enough, probably. Yeah.
If I could just jump in with a question of my own for a second, and this goes back to the law, Charlotte, that you have mentioned a couple of times that went into effect, I guess, last December. Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering why the law happened when it did and not, sooner or later, and why you think that it seems like you're cautiously optimistic about this law, but there have been lots of other great laws and initiatives in the past that came to naught. So what gave rise to this law at this point in time? And do you think that will actually have an impact?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm a political scientist by training as well. But I think what is good is really having a law has somewhat of a symbolic effect. So at least, I mean, we have been around with climate policy for quite some years, and now at least we have a law, and I think that's a good sign, because at least signals that maybe it signals that it's more serious now. And I think, yes, at least the idea of having a law has been around for quite some year, but I guess this adoption, I would really see it in together with this really strong wave of protests and this recognition that we are really far behind. And at least I think, even though I think at least it led to a rather quick adoption then of the law. I mean, they made it then in 2019, and I think that's the thing. But yes, I agree. I'm careful. I would be careful with whether this will really change, bring a quick change. I guess not. Yeah.
All right. Well, we have all sorts of questions in here, and so I apologize if I take them out of order, but here's a great one. Has anyone estimated the contribution of the internationalization of German best practices to other jurisdictions? That if you factor that in, then the German contribution globally would be far more significant.
Yeah, we've been studying this quite a bit actually, especially with regard to Energiewende, because this is basically Germany's, it's a declared aim to export the Energiewende in its regulatory approach to other countries, and this has advantages for Germany as well, of course, as it means closer ties, possibilities for technology export, etc. But it is very hard to put in numbers. I mean, this is sort of a typical political science problem also, I guess, to really find out about causality there. But it is true, I feel, from interviews that we do with partner countries, for instance, we see that the partners do, in fact, adopt these types of clean energy policies, also climate policies, also because they want a good relationship with Germany. And Germany, I mean, I think another important contribution, and again, you can't measure it very well, but it's been instrumental, for instance, in the creation of the International Renewable Energy Agency that provides free data on renewable energy, on all sorts of energy sources to the world. So everyone has access to this, all of a sudden, to this type of data that wasn't accessible before. And I also wouldn't underestimate that, just sort of creating this knowledge on a global level, creating this opportunity to learn more about this and the opportunities and so on. I think that these types of things do play a very important role, I feel, but again, hard to put in numbers.
Yeah, maybe let's go on with the next question. I think I can see at least 10, so grip a few more. Or?
Yeah, I'm also trying to combine some of the questions. So there are quite a few references to nuclear, and I know that a lot of people think that Germany's phase out of nuclear was the wrong course of action, that coal is the bigger kind of problem. So you know, how is the country going to deal with the lost energy that came from nuclear?
Should I go? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I know it's a German particularity with the nuclear stuff. I mean, people are very, very concerned. I mean, obviously, we were fairly close to the Chernobyl accident in 86. So people really experienced the issues that arise if it does go wrong, basically, and people have become very skeptical of this. And I think very much this is why, sort of in combination, the set date for nuclear phase out basically came along with increased renewable energy goals, because of course the realization was what probably happens automatically if you phase out nuclear is we use more coal. We have that at home, we can produce it here. It's actually dirtier coal, than produces more emissions than the coal we could actually import from others. But then what we discover more recently is that Germany has adopted, and I mean coal, by the way, I mean that basically is for electricity supply, right? I mean, it doesn't touch upon issues like transport, for instance, where we don't use coal. But then the new narrative a little bit is also about gas, actually, about natural gas as a bridge fuel, because I think there is some realization that we have been ramping up renewables quite a bit. We've been improving energy efficiency, but we cannot meet a system without nuclear, without coming up with some additional systems. So gas has, for I think more than not too long, but maybe a year or so, definitely played a role in this narrative, as well as it emits roughly, I think, half of what coal emits. So it is definitely part of the plan as well.
All right, well, here's an interesting question from Thomas O'Donnell, who I think is at the Hertie School in Berlin. He's asking about the wind crisis. He seems to think that it's impossible to expand as needed onshore, and also the windmills are quite inefficient. Apparently, US windmills have 80% higher capacity. And from this perspective, maybe the US looks like more of a front runner than Germany does with the all of the above kind of policy. So I guess if you could address wind energy for a second, and if there are plans to make wind generating capacity more efficient. Charlotte, you're muted.
No, I think maybe this is also a question for our more energy expert, Sonja. Do you think you can say something?
I can. I'm not very familiar. I was surprised to learn just now about the technology advantage the US seems to have here. I didn't know it was that severe, to be honest. What I sort of and I know there's definitely, there's boundaries to wind energy overall. This is a German issue because unlike the US, to start with, we don't have as much space as there is in the US. So the onshore wind, it definitely has, it has its limits. And not to forget also social acceptance. I mean, that's been a huge problem in Germany, and that's led to a lot of stagnation in I think both technological development. Not a lot of money put into R&D because there was basically a gridlock because the public was just not supporting this technology anymore. There was no support anymore for putting up windmills, and they've tried to through reforms now to make this more attractive for communities to and this is also a model that already exists in the US, to actually benefit from the income this electricity generates. But this is an issue that certainly needs to be solved, because public isn't on board, of course there can't be any type of improvement in any way. That's basically, I can't really talk to about the technology. I'm sorry about that.
All right, well, here's a question from Colonel McNeil, getting back to politics for a second. So there seems to be widespread political support for these policies in Germany today, but that's something that could change into the future. I'm going to add something a little bit more specific. There will be a new chancellor, probably by the end of next year. Merkel had an exceptional background in climate policy compared to almost anybody else who will probably be chancellor. Given that the next chancellor will likely be another Christian Democrat, it could be Merz. Well, I guess it could be a Christian social union guy if Söder gets it. But how do you think their leadership on climate's going to be? And then related to that, given the costs of responding to the COVID-19 pandemic and the economic fallout, will that affect the resolve that Germans in all walks of life would have to achieve these ambitious goals?
I can go ahead, I guess. So I think first on the politics of climate in Germany, I think indeed the support in Germany is quite broad. And I think also by now, by 2020, we have quite a broad support across parties. So even the Social Christian, the CDU, and the party of Chancellor Merkel, I think there is a very broad support for climate policy. So to be honest, I wouldn't, even though there's of course more right-wing sectors, I'm pretty confident that we won't see a big backlash in climate policy. Of course, there's some things better than others, but I think the broad direction is set if more or less our general policy direction stays the same. This said, I guess it's of course important to say that also in Germany that there are some tendencies, some newer parties, such as, for example, the AfD, the very right-wing parties, where there is climate deniers really at the rule and climate deniance happening. So of course also that we have in Germany, and I think this populist movement is something where we need to take care of, or which needs to be tackled, whereas I think not only in the sense of climate, but in a general democratic sense, where what we need to tackle in Germany. But at least I hope that, yes, that even if Merkel, or as we know, she won't stay, we still have climate policy. And I think it's also, and I think we tried to say a few words on that even also when Merkel started, even being an environmental minister, her first government wasn't that climate friendly. But things, yeah, I think have changed for the good. The COVID crisis, yes, I think it is, of course, still hard to say. And I think we already have heard lots and lots of voices that say, well, this is increasing our costs, so we need to save costs. And then where can we start saving costs is, of course, with climate. So I guess we have heard several voices like this. But I myself am hoping the contrary. Actually, I'm hoping that this crisis that we're all facing together is actually moving us also towards a broader understanding, towards more awareness of that this is not only a pandemic, it is a social crisis, that we really need a deep transformation of all sectors, and not only climate change, but also a sustainable climate policy. So climate change and pandemics are closely related. Of course, that climate change will worsen, will make all these the diseases and pandemics, it will make it much worse. So I hope that we learn from this crisis, and that we to start to come up with really a deeper transformation, and that we learn that investing in our health system and all that's really important, and therefore really maybe get a more sustainable change somehow. And I'm hoping for that. But yeah, let's see.
Sonja, did you want to weigh in?
I could add, I mean, this is, of course, again, the benefit of the climate law that Charlotte mentioned is, and this is again the same in the US, I mean, if you have something written in law, it's a bit harder to get rid of it again. So even if we end up with a new chancellor that maybe at some point isn't as ambitious, at least we have the law. I mean, we could put it that way. I guess it's not very optimistic. But I mean, agreed on the COVID crisis also, because this has also been an approach at the EU level, the Commission's Green Deal proposals in a way, or not the Green Deal itself, but the response to Corona to use this as a transformation in a bigger sense, to use all the money that has been put into to COVID, basically into this crisis, to support infrastructures, to support businesses, to support individuals, to actually also transform society towards more sustainability, towards more climate friendliness. And in a way, we did a small analysis of this already. I mean, it's been beneficial, of course, for Germans' climate goals. We might actually end up reaching them. And then who knows how emissions will start picking up again as this crisis hopefully passes to a large degree. But I mean, certainly what's happened in Germany is a huge push for digitalization. That was, maybe you wouldn't think it from the US, but it's really an issue, especially if you're not in urban centers in Germany. So I think it's acted as a push in that regard, and we could build on that. I mean, it's not, we don't know if that happens, but it's I would see it more as an opportunity at this point. I don't know. I hope I'm not wrong.
All right, well, we're almost out of time, so I'll pose one more question, which again is gleaned from a lot of the questions that we have here. So I found it really fascinating as part of this law that went into effect last year, that each ministry, that each sector is now responsible for making some progress. You mentioned in particular transport, and we have talked a little bit about how difficult that's going to be to address, but also the building sector. So I was wondering if you could share some thoughts on what could be done in the building sector to reduce its climate footprint, as well as food systems and food production in Germany.
So yes, I try to be quickly, and I also must say I'm not an expert in building retrofits, and I think, but I guess the building sector is difficult in Germany because I think the owner and renters, it has a very particular structure there, and so I guess it's definitely the first step is what they will do is how would you say that? So it's, I guess it has to do with taxes. So lowering taxes for those who retrofit their buildings. So I think this is one of the first measures that was agreed there. Let's hope that it will help. And then of course there's always standards, or there's increased standards for new buildings. To that they need to have a certain efficiency level. But yeah, to be honest, I think this is the sector I'm most skeptical about. So where we will achieve this, because I mean we both live in a city in like Berlin, where a large amount of the building is old, and you have it is really, I guess it's really difficult to find in many cases it's difficult to find efficient retrofit solutions. So when, to be honest, if I look at my more my personal situation in our building here, I see we will really face difficulties with getting this building energy efficient. So I think this is actually where probably the largest challenge lies. So quickly.
I mean, just to add briefly to that, I think, I mean, I just read yesterday, what makes me hopeful in this regard is because the retrofits are really the bigger challenge. New buildings are highly energy efficient already as they are set up. But in terms of retrofits, apparently the government has put out a lot of programs, a lot of money to actually encourage owners to retrofit. And at first these funds weren't used at all. There was no one actually applying for them. And this has changed actually over the past year. Apparently more and more of these funds are actually tapped. So I think there's it's a good start, at least I would say. And with regard to the food issue, I mean, I haven't looked too much into that, but it also plays into this whole approach to having a more circular economy, buying local, buying regional. I mean, these are some of the approaches that are really being pushed now, also during the COVID crisis here, to reduce transport costs, to import less, to reuse more. That type of thing, and this also goes for agriculture, for food. But of course, again, the agriculture sectors, there's been a lot of protests actually also from this sector last year, because they feel they're treated unfairly in their approach to actually providing food. So it's a challenging sector, I think, and it still lacks solutions, and the minister in charge, I find her also not too ambitious with regard to climate policy. So that's definitely also a laggard, I would say.
All right, well, on that note, we have come to full time. So I'd like to thank Sonja and Charlotte one more time for speaking with us. It was really a terrific webinar. I'd also like to thank the Embassy of the Federal Republic here in the United States for their generous support of the speaker series. And I hope that all the attendees will check out the AICGS website. If you haven't already, you should subscribe to our advisor, which has excellent articles and announcements about upcoming events. And we really hope to see all of you very soon. Bye for now.